And of course, the show is sponsored, or rather produced by the People-Pueblo Party, whose motto is common sense politics for the people, the planet, and the animals, and is sponsored by the People's Health Project Incorporated. And we want to thank that organization for providing our hardware and software. So tonight, I'm going to do what I always do. I'm going to bring in my co-host, and then we're going to let our guests say hi real quick. And, then we'll get into our COVID segment, and we'll get into our main topic tonight, which is Juneteenth, and trying to make sense of everything that's going on. So go ahead, Bill.
Hey, welcome everyone. It's a busy weekend. It's one of the busiest weekends I ever had because it was unique. It was unique in the fact that it was 3 days of observance, and in the fact that being that Juneteenth actually fell on a Saturday, the federal government was celebrating it on a Friday, and then we also celebrated it on a Saturday, the actual day, followed by Father's Day. So it was a 3-day weekend of activity, unlike one. I've never seen that in my life. I'm 61. I've never seen that. It's very unique. It's like maybe every now and then you get a month, every so many years, where you have 5 weekends. 5 weeks of that month. A month, 5 Saturdays or 5 days, and it just makes you think about it. You live long enough, you'll see anything. So it's refreshing to see that for the first time, to be a part and actually partake in it, and not just because it is vogue in a sense now, but those warriors that you see in front of us always been celebrating, and to get others on board. That's why you can't take the smile off my face, even though I'm appreciative. I know it's a drop in the bucket, but you have to celebrate your victories. So, Ashe, I'll turn it back over to Mark.
All right. So, Larry, you want to, Larry Hales, longtime organizer, revolutionary. Larry is one of the brothers I met a while ago. It was like 10 years ago, and has been consistent in struggle. He's a dad. So happy Father's Day. I'm glad you're here. Say hi to the audience.
Hello, everyone. Mark already introduced my name, so I'm glad to be here. This is my second show. I want to second what Bill said regarding celebrating victories. And I think it's important that, for a lot of people, there's contradictions and everything, but for a lot of people, it feels like we're being seen, and that's important. So.
Ashe.
All right. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to go into our Stop COVID segment. We do this, because the pandemic's not over. I'm hoping one day we won't have to do this segment, but we're not there quite yet. So it's a very short video. It's about the Delta variant that's now becoming the dominant COVID variant in the United States.
NBC News medical contributor Dr. Natalie Azar. Dr. Azar, I want to start with this Delta variant. We keep hearing more contagious, more severe if you are unvaccinated and contract this variant. What do we know, though, about how effective current vaccines are against the Delta variant?
Well, good morning, Ellison. Well, the good news is that for the mRNA vaccines, and you're pretty well protected against the Delta variant. Now, this data is actually coming out of the UK, where they actually looked at how the Delta variant fared against the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine as well as the AstraZeneca vaccine. As you know, the AstraZeneca vaccine is not one that we have here in the US. And basically, after 2 doses of the Pfizer vaccine, your protection was at about 88%. So if we extrapolate to Moderna, which has the same, of course, technology with the mRNA, we can assume it's roughly the same. We don't, however, have that data with the J&J vaccine. But remember, in all likelihood, with all vaccinations, you are protected from severe disease. But we do have at least that granular data out of the UK right now, Ellison.
And there's a new AP poll that's showing a majority of Americans are returning to life before COVID, if you will. But what should we be doing to continue protecting ourselves from COVID-19 as more people are interacting daily? Are there still concerns, particularly in the medical community, that it might be too soon to be opening back up?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you'll get a variety of opinions on that. I think it is certainly safe to say that if you are fully vaccinated, you can essentially go about life as you would have pre-pandemic. And remember, this also has to do with your own, what we call risk tolerance. That means what are you willing to potentially risk based on your, underlying medical problems, your household risks, that kind of thing. We should spend some time talking about the fact that certain individuals who are immunocompromised may have not mounted as robust an immune response to vaccination. So in spite of the fact that they are fully vaccinated, they may not actually be as protected. If you're unvaccinated, this is a particularly perilous time, given the surgence, I should say, of the Delta variant. It's really increasing here in the U.S. at a clip, Ellison. And as you mentioned, it is likely more virulent, and as we know, much more contagious.
And Dr. Azar, you touched on the United Kingdom and studies there. There is a new UK study that deals specifically with the long-term effects that COVID-19 is having on patients. Take a listen to what former FDA Commissioner Dr. Scott Gottlieb had to say, and then I'll ask you a question on the back end.
About 300 people, a little over 300 people developed COVID. And when they compared those individuals who developed COVID against matched controls, people who were similar, who didn't develop COVID, they saw a pretty persistent decline in certain brain tissue matter. Certain areas of their brain showed a decline in actual tissue, a shrinkage of parts of their brain.
So what does this tell us, Dr. Azar, about how COVID impacts the body? Have we sort of reached a point where long-haul COVID can be looked at a little more closely than before?
Well, absolutely. And, if you just look at the sheer numbers of people who've been infected with COVID-19 and the estimates of individuals who will have lingering symptoms after their initial infection, which, by the way, doesn't need to be severe. It could even be mild or asymptomatic infection. And patients months later still having significant headaches and brain fog and exhaustion and fatigue. It's incredibly important, not only the fact that many public health experts say that this will be the next public health emergency for the U.S. just in terms of dollars. But it's important not only to get insight into what's happening with COVID-19 and this post-viral syndrome, but all post-viral and post-infectious syndromes that have come before it, and specifically chronic fatigue syndrome. That community is certainly hoping that some scientific insight and potentially therapeutics will come out of this devastation. Ellison.
All right, Dr. Natalie Azar, thank you so much.
Okay. So I remember, Bill, we were talking one time, talking about COVID, and you were saying is the gift that keeps on giving. So, I mean, my wife recently, had she's having hypersensitivity to certain foods after she had gotten COVID. And she's like, what the hell is going on? And I said, well, part of it is that if you had sensitivities to things before, there's a possibility that with COVID, then it becomes a hypersensitivity. So if something gave you a little stomach problem before, now it's going to give you a full stomach ache,
Like the Alfred Hitchcock movie.
Right. So also, this whole thing with the Delta variant coming from India, I think that right now, in terms of COVID, is probably the best time in terms of, I'm still wearing my mask. I'm not giving that up, because as long as people in Cuba, Vietnam, and China wearing masks, I'm wearing masks.
There you go.
So, and they're doing better than us, and they're still wearing masks. So, I'm doing that. But they're saying that the people who don't have the vaccine have more risk, and that's an easy one. That's a very easy one, because if that's true, we'll be able to see it by September or before September. And so, because, a lot of times we're getting mixed messages, even with masks, wear a mask, don't wear a mask, wear a mask. But unfortunately, with this pandemic, the proof is in the numbers, and we'll know soon enough whether that's accurate or inaccurate. Larry, Bill, y'all want to have anything to say before we move on to the next topic?
Well, I would say that the last point you said is really can be overstated. The proof is in the numbers. But the question is, what's the real numbers? I mean, Cuomo didn't give us the real numbers. They talk about in Brazil, they had a research group talking about over the last yeah, it was 1,100 children and adolescents that got the COVID, and they said it was another research group that counted and said the numbers is closer to 3,000. So that's more than double. And the same with Indonesia. The last, what is it? Yesterday, I think they had a record of 1.5 thousand people that came down with the COVID. So I mean, what is the real numbers? And I had a friend of mine that she said something, I don't remember what it was, talking about the risk. And that's important. They went and got the COVID test, and it's noticed also how they don't give you data on Johnson and Johnson. Johnson and Johnson is like the illegitimate child of the vaccine. They gave you Moderna and Pfizer, but they won't give you the results of Johnson and Johnson. And the reason why I said that, because he happened to take the Johnson and Johnson, him and his wife, and he is a little bit compromised, and he went back and kind of find out the effectiveness is only 1% for him. 1%.
Yeah, I
1%.
yeah, the issue of numbers is important, because when I worked at Harlem Hospital, we eradicated tuberculosis in Harlem. And one thing that we found consistent is that the state always underreported the number of cases.
The fluctuation in numbers.
No, it was consistently underreported, because what happens is that the public health institutes, for them to record a number, they have to have a certain level of proof. So, for example, when we had COVID here in New York, the hospital sent a lot of people home. And so people wind up dying at home. And you would just hear the ambulance every night going to pick up dead bodies. And a lot of those people were not counted as dying from COVID, but dying from respiratory ailments or something else. So, just having worked in public health in Harlem Hospital for like 9 years, it's consistent that public health always underreports. So if they're saying 500,000 people died in the U.S. of COVID, that number got to be at least around 700,000.
Or if you're writing a book like Cuomo, then they find another reason to underreport too.
Yeah. So definitely the United States is still, Brazil is catching up. But the United States is still the country with the most number of COVID deaths.
Yeah, Brazil is second behind the United States by 500,000.
Yeah. All right. So, we'll see. We're going to keep an eye on this. We have our weekly Stop COVID segment. And, people should go out. Being out is actually the safest place to be. But definitely take the measures, wear your mask, wash those hands still, because washing your hands and wearing masks not only helps prevent COVID, but it also helps prevent the flu, the cold, and other germs that can get into our systems. So let's go on to our topic. Our topic is Juneteenth. This is our second part of this discussion, and we already have some comments.
Good comments too.
Yeah. Well, actually, let me go back to the COVID thing, Darlene. Any stats on the Delta variant in New York? We have some preliminary information, which I'm going to share. I'm going to bring it back at the end before we go. So, Darlene, don't go anywhere. Also, we have Obsidian says Republicans passed the 13th Amendment ending slavery and permanently outlawing it. 14th Amendment securing for blacks equal rights in the law. 15th Amendment giving blacks the right to vote. And Obsidian also says Democrats in the 1880s invented segregation Jim Crow laws that lasted through the 1960s. Democrats also came up with separate but equal rationale that justify segregation. And finally, Obsidian says BLM, peace out. Okay, so that kind of got us started. So, Larry, this is the first time you've been here to discuss with us Juneteenth. What are your thoughts?
I think that when we look at politics and political shifts and political parties, we have to look at what's happening nationally. What the state is with capitalism, as well as imperialism, and what's happened internationally. And I think that one of the things we see now is that the U.S. is, in order to maintain its predominance militarily, economically, which is a few years from now, they project that China will be the largest economy in the world, that the U.S. has, has to begin to even more so protect the democratic rights of oppressed people, people who historically been oppressed in the United States, and to project itself as a truly multinational society, so they can get people to buy into the capitalist system and to protect it. So, and it's the same reason, that the mainstream bourgeois media pushed Barack Obama, and he became the president, because it gave them, after 8 years of the Bush cabal, it gave them more political capital around the world, and Obama was able to do certain things that Bush politically couldn't do anymore. He was able to extend the war on terror. He was able to push it into Pakistan. He was able to bomb Africa. He was able to overthrow the Gaddafi government in Libya. All these things that Bush would have had a hard time being able to do, even though he had projected Libya as part of the axis of evil when he first came into office. So I think that everything is a contradiction. Of course, we should celebrate the fact that it's a national holiday and people are going to be given another day off. But we also have to understand the rationale behind why the political establishment was willing to go so far to push it into being a national holiday. We have to look at contradictions all around, what are the positives and the negatives, and how do we address these things with people in the mass movement, and just everyday people.
Yeah, and I just wanted to go back to something Obsidian has said. The two-party system, the Republicans and Democrats, they're both controlled by the rich, by the powerful in this country, right? So during the Civil War, the Republican Party was recognized as the anti-slavery party, and the Democratic Party as the white supremacy party, right? And then during the Roosevelt era, they switched, right? And so one always plays the white supremacy card in an open, explicit way. And then the other one uses it in a more covert, supporting white supremacy and trying to win over the African-American and other people of color communities. So, I think Obsidian's point is really good in that we really do have to see the two parties as representative of the ruling class and how it plays us. And it builds up these coalitions that give it a popular mandate, because there's no ruling class that can rule without some kind of popular or mass mandate. So Bill, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, you pretty much kind of like both of you set us off on the right path, especially with the things in the chat with Arsenio, because we're talking about what are we talking about?
Juneteenth.
What's the holiday? I drew a blank.
Okay, brother.
What we just celebrate? Help me out.
Juneteenth, man.
Juneteenth. I should have wore the Juneteenth shirt, man, if I knew I was going to have a scene moment. But anyway, like I was talking to Mark, and it was
wait a minute, you ain't have COVID before, did you?
Yeah, I did, man. Come on, stop that. He brings out a good point. You cannot discuss the significance of Juneteenth without going back and dissecting the fraudulent misconception of the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th Amendment. Because we know that the 13th Amendment that was spoken on in the chat, what it did was, it was a law that was passed that abolished enslavement and involuntary servitude. And so that's why it's tied in with the Emancipation Proclamation, because oftentimes people give then President Lincoln, who had won by a landslide, was very popular, the credit for abolishing enslavement. And we know that it took a constitutional amendment, which he did not do. We got connected dots to forever abolish enslavement and servitude. He didn't do that. He only actually the amendment that was passed was just, it involved 11 states. That's all it involved. So he didn't do that. He didn't even want to do that. I forgot. It was something that he did that was called the what was it called? It was called the I think it starts with a C. I can't remember. I can't remember what it is. Maybe I'll think about it later. Which actually, if he had had his way, it would have forever ensured that you could always have enslaved people and servitude. Lincoln tried to do that. I think it was in 1861, which I can't. The name escapes me right now. So you have to connect the dots to so that people know. Just like when Columbus Day comes, they no longer teach that in school. You turn on the news, they no longer say that Columbus discovered America. And why is that? It's because people that commit their life, people like Brother Larry here, Brother Mark, and I like to include myself in that, but our examples, the people that led, we're predecessors of, they kept talking about this myth. The same way we celebrated, we acknowledged the atrocity of Black Wall Street. We kept hearing that, and it was the historians that had the conscience and the wherewithal when they wanted to talk about Timothy McVeigh and the biggest mass execution, murder in Oklahoma's history, and they said, "Wait a minute, what about Black Wall Street?" We talk about, wait a minute, what about the truth about the 13th Amendment? What did it actually do? Wait a minute. What about the truth about the Emancipation Proclamation? Is it true that he freed the slaves? No, he did not. So I have to take my hat off to the direction of the questions that you asked, Mark, and also the statements in this chat. So I will give it back to you at this time. I'm sure we're going to develop some of these points.
Yeah, if I could, I want to mention something about the parties, if I could, just for a second.
All right, brother.
I just wanted to mention the fact that, the Republican Party in its early inception, I think it was founded in Wisconsin, but and it had two wings, the radical Republicans and then, the regular Republicans. But, I think we have to look at the development of technology at that point in history and whether or not slavery if it was deemed by the sector that the Republican Party mentioned, which is the industrialists and finance capitalists, if they felt that it was necessary anymore. The world was changing, and so politically, in order to maintain this slaveocracy in the South, was not necessarily good for them, but also economically, was it the most efficient way to be able to extract, the resources in the South anymore? And I don't really think it was. Of course, we had, the black codes, the peonage laws, and those representing de facto slavery, and how they continued. But the estates were broken up. The larger states in the South were broken up. And so I think if we look at the Republican Party, it's still, when you look at finance capitalists, it still, for the most part, represents the interest of that sector of the ruling class. They both do. But, I think that we have to look at beyond, the morality of the party, look at the financial and economic reasons and political reasons why it felt that slavery as an institution had to end, and the fact that they found themselves in conflict with the slaveocracy in the South. So these were two opposing economic and political camps within a developing capitalist system. I think we have to look at that, and that helps us see it beyond just morality and just them trying to perpetuate and grow the system.
Well, I'm going to say a little something on that, but I just wanted to acknowledge Darlene's question. And so I put it in the chat for her. I said, hey, Darlene, 6% of COVID cases in New York City are the Delta variant. So right now, there are places outside New York City where the Delta variant is like 30%. New York is still at 6%. And New York also has a higher percentage of folks with the Pfizer and Moderna, the mRNA vaccine. But we'll see. I mean, the numbers, they're going to come out before September, and we'll see what the trends are. That was just for Darlene. But also, I think that's what's real key is that we know that 0.01% of this country are the billionaires, right? We know who they are. We know that they run this country. They control the government. They pay for the election of the president, pay for the election of the Senate. The United States Chamber of Commerce, which represents, it used to be called the Business Roundtable, represents big business. And during Trump's election, most of their money, unlike previous years, went to the Democrats. And they went to down ballot races like the senatorial races in Georgia. And so normally the United States Chamber of Commerce gives most of the money to the Republicans. And Trump and McConnell and them were complaining, how can you do this? you're betraying us. And, and so the ruling class cannot rule on its own. It needs a popular base. And I think in Lincoln's time, what they did was they got the small farmers, because white people, when they came from Europe, were given land taken from Native Americans. And so they got that coalition of people. And then they got the northern industrialists, the rich people, the railroad people, the banking people. They formed part of that coalition. And for them, I agree with you, brother, that slavery was not in their economic interest, right? Because they were moving on to factories. They were moving on to industrialization. But slavery in the South was extremely profitable, right? Especially not so much in places like Virginia, where they weren't producing a lot of things. Virginia became kind of like this, where they tried to get, they tried to sell the enslaved people they had there to, like Alabama, Mississippi, those areas, those part of the country was considered the West, right? Part of the West. They were creating new cotton plantation, Louisiana. Those places, they had a really, slavery was bad in Virginia, right? Slavery was bad, but it was exponentially worse in places like Alabama and Mississippi, where whippings were constant. And I think, 100, what was the name of that? 12 Years a Slave, that movie?
Yeah.
A lot of feminists don't like it because of the portrayal of women, right? And they have a point. But the problem is the person who was writing that book was writing the book for white women. And so when he portrayed black women in what feminists would consider demeaning ways, he was appealing to there was a big white middle class woman sector that was supporting abolition, right? And they were allies with Frederick Douglass. And so in that, you see, because he is sent to the deep, what we call the deep South, right? Where slavery was by all means profitable, and that's why the Southern aristocrats or slave plantation owners, they didn't want to give it up. They would rather destroy the Union than give it up. And so because the ruling class is so small, these rich people, the Bloombergs, the Bezos, you could probably stuff them all in my living room, right? They can't run shit unless they have some kind of popular control or hold over groups in the society. And so what does the neo-fascists do? They focus on white supremacy. They focus on evangelical Christians. They focus on Latinos who are anti-communist, anti-socialist. They focus on certain African Americans who are benefiting from the system, and certain Asians. And so, these different parts of the ruling class of the rich, they have to have a popular base, and that's what Biden represents. Biden came in; he's a segregationist, for God's sakes. He's the one who pushed mass incarceration. Yet, he's signing Juneteenth. Because, the ruling class realizes, hey, we got to bring black people in. We got to show them some kind of respect. We got to give them something, right? So they don't revolt, but also so we could be a counterweight to the other side of the ruling class that wants Trump to completely take over the government and get rid of any kind of voting. And so, just to piggyback on what was said already, but this idea that then we become willing participants in that, right? Because we say, well, shit, am I going to go with the Jim Crow, open fascist, neo-fascist Trump people, or I'm going to go with the, segregationist, turn neoliberal Joe Biden? And for most of our people in our communities, the choice was like mad obvious. It's like, yeah, I'm going to vote for Biden, And so when I went to vote, it was still dark outside, and there was lines around the block, for people who vote for the Democrats and voting for Joe Biden. So
yeah, let me add to that. The act I was talking about before is called the Corwin, Corwin amendment, and that if Lincoln had got his way on that, you could have never banned enslavement in America, period. But also once the 13th Amendment was in effect and showed how profitable enslavement was to America's financial structure is that they tried different things. They had things called the Black Code, which was to ensure that African Americans really still was limited in their mobility and still would work for little or nothing. They wanted to do that. And then they had convict leasing. And you mentioned peonage. All of these things with convict leasing, the convicts would come out of jail. They would do not only was it leasing and they didn't make no money, the state made the money.
Right.
Whoever leased them. And not only did the state make the money, they had they were better in jail. They were coming in doing railroad jobs, plantation work, dangerous, high. They didn't care because all they did was go get another inmate and replace them. The same with peonage. The difference between peonage and enslavement, when you had an enslaved African and he was considered your property, even though it's despicable as that sound, when you have something that's yours or you think is yours, you want to take care of it. You want to hold on to it as long as you possibly can. You only get rid of a thing if a car when it's no good to you, it's broken down. The same with an enslaved African. But with peonage, you didn't care. It was servitude. They would arrest an African American for anything, and they would just lock him up and tell him, you have to pay off this debt. Yeah. And maybe the debt took 2 months or 6 months, and they would count those months. And when the 6 months came on, they still would keep them another 6 months or another year. So it was, with the Jim Crow and everything, the economical base, the white American benefit from. And when we talk about Juneteenth, when we talk about the generational wealth, and people like when we had Joe K on one of the things, Joe K said that I would have to disagree with him. He said they was going to lose anyhow because of the crash of the stock market. Are you kidding me? They were sitting on oil. How was they going to lose it? They created welfare because they were so used to getting stuff that they said, oh God, what am I going to do? African American, we were so used to making a meal out of ham hocks. This was their scraps. Right. We was resourceful. We could only wonder what we could do. You can go for the riots in St. Louis in 1917. I mean, Rosewood, in Philly in 1985. You got so many. We are littered with examples how they always try to repress us. And like Mark said, and then the Republican system is what the Democratic system became, and they flip-flop. They always got to have a repressed system. It's always got to be a case of the have versus the have-nots.
Right, and they always want you to chase the lesser of two evils.
Yeah, they make you make a choice, and that's how they pit brother against brother. When I say brother against brother, I'm talking about ethnic, what have you, whether it be black, whether it be Hispanic, because they dangle that little carrot. You can struggle and maybe get certain victories as we talked about this week, but does that translate into a monetary victory? Not necessarily. So do you want a monetary? So they look on the weak link and they divide and conquer, and every time they have to have a press con, those that are compromised, they push them out there. Say, look, he's black. Look, he's Hispanic, and they all of a sudden become the voice for the many.
Well, you got Kamala Harris, right? And you got Hispanics all up and down the Biden administration. But Larry, did you want to say something?
No, I think that the conversation is heading. I think it's very illuminating for a lot of people and for me as well.
Yeah, let me just put Darlene back on because I think Darlene is on fire. It is about time they got rid of Columbus Day as holiday. I'm happy that Juneteenth is a holiday. I worry, though, that this is going to be monetized and turned into a holiday for profit like everything else.
Talk about Juneteenth. Wait, hold up, Mark. I'm going to hit you with one. That is excellent because that Columbus thing needs to be developed because you see what they're trying to do now, nameless holiday and call them a day off because they want to eradicate Columbus. And this is you gotta take a second and think about they will stop at nothing instead of realize the truth and realize and correct it instead of say, okay, we're going to do that. All right, so since they want to resist, we're not going to call nobody holiday by name. We're just going to call them a day off. That's what they're trying to do now. So thanks for bringing that up, Darlene.
Yeah. So I mean, just bringing that up, we know that capitalism tries to monetize everything. I think Darlene put it out there. Everything becomes around consumerism. You know, everything is debased so that, like, one thing I found interesting was that, there's a flag for Juneteenth, and
Yeah.
that's good. That is good. But it should be two flags, right? It should be the red, black, and green, and it should be the Juneteenth flag waving together right next to each other. And is very interesting how, when the establishment decides to celebrate Juneteenth, you get no recognition of the red, black, and green, none whatsoever.
I observed that too. I did observe that too. And I think if you went with your idea and you established it and you did red, black, and green and put Juneteenth in the middle with the day, I think that those other flags become obsolete.
Yeah, I lived in Dallas for a long time, and that's the first I learned of Juneteenth. Was living in Texas. I lived there's my last 3 years in high school was in Texas. I'm from Pennsylvania, and I had gone back and forth between Pennsylvania and Mississippi. I never heard of it. But when I moved to Denver, Colorado, I learned that Denver had one of the largest Juneteenth in the country. And the Black community in Denver is very interesting. There used to be a Black town called Deerfield, Colorado, in between Denver, Colorado, and Greeley, that pretty much after the Second World War, because people were drawn into manufacturing away from Deerfield and into the Denver, which is a relatively new city within the last 80 years. The town ceased to be. Now it's a historical monument, or at least the remaining buildings. A lot of the people that wound up going to Deerfield and to Denver were people who actually left Oklahoma after the destruction of the Green section in Tulsa. And they're used. So Denver has a very homegrown Black arts community. I think Duke Ellington called it the Harlem of the West. But it had one of the largest Juneteenths, and thousands of people. They would take Walton Street from downtown. Walton Street is like the center of 5 Points. Like 5 Points streets meet at Walton Street, and it was the first. I think it was the first Black community in Denver, and it would stretch for blocks, and there would be, it wasn't generally recognized by the city. It was permitted, but people who were selling things made them themselves. People in the Black community, they made money off of it. But then the city began reducing the footprint of it little by little. And the final year that it was on Walton, they actually drove a street sweeper down the middle of the street to force people off the street. And then it was moved to a baseball field, and then it was moved out of 5 Points. So what was happening in 5 Points at that time is they had started a law called, they had brought broken windows into Denver, but it was neighborhood specific. It was just for Northeast Denver. So at this time, they started developing these large luxury buildings. So this was at the same time when they started decreasing the footprint of Juneteenth, and when they no longer allowed it to happen in 5 Points. So it's very interesting that this year they had a Juneteenth on Walton Street. 5 Points is no longer a predominantly Black community. During that time, they closed schools, they opened charter schools, they closed feeder schools, and then they said, well, there's no kids going to the high school because the feeder school was closed. We're going to make that a charter school. So they charterized all the schools in Northeast Denver. But 5 Points now is predominantly white. But there is some political capital for bringing Juneteenth back, because it makes the people who move there, who displaced the community, feel not so bad about having been part of that whole process.
Right.
And the city can say, look, we're good people now. We're allowing Juneteenth to come back to a community we destroyed.
But that's the playbook. When you look at it on the same thing, when you look at Greenwood, they ran the highway through that.
Yeah.
Destroyed, and they ran the highway, almost guaranteeing that city would never look the same again. And even if you want to come to New York and look at Harlem Month, it used to be Harlem Day, then it was Harlem Week, then it became Harlem Month. Where was it held? It was held on a one street that you could not ignore what we was doing, on 125th Street. Forever, it was held on 125th Street. But your cousins got upset. They didn't like it, so they moved it. They moved to 135th Street. You had to make different plans when you came to Harlem on that day, on that Saturday, the third Saturday in August, because you couldn't go through. It was the quickest way. The geometry tell you the quickest path between 2 points is a straight line. So you couldn't go to 125th Street and get on at the Triborough Bridge and go to Connecticut or go to Brooklyn or Queens or Jersey or wherever. That you had to pay attention. You had to pay homage. But they always the same playbook. The same playbook. Yeah. And so they give you a little crumb and then you want to be jubilant. And you have to understand, and these stories need to be told. Mm-hmm. There's a timeline that need to be told and need to be reminded, and people need to talk about it. Just like, for instance, I'm a personal story. I'm a local 3 electrician. Mm-hmm. In 1986, Martin Luther King birthday became a federal holiday. And talk about what Darlene talked about, the economic profit. One of the things that his widow at the time, Coretta Scott King and Stevie Wonder didn't like, said they didn't want it to be commercialized. So it took, now the electricians, we have 3-year contract. It took them 5 contracts, 15 years to 2001 for us to get it incorporated in our contract. Now, conscious people, of course, isn't going to work. And they're not only going to work, it's a day on because they're going to teach and they're going to do something positive for the court. So now I am going to go to we meet the second Thursday at Eastmont. I'm going to put that on them because I'm going to push it. Is it going to take 5 years? I mean, 5 contracts, 15 years. And because now they always pushing, we have a zero tolerance. And I don't want to be elongated because that's a myth and we dispelled that. So now let's see what you're going to do. So they're the same playbook, nothing changed. We have to change that. And that's why we're here on People-Pueblo Power TV.
Yeah. So let me switch this up a little bit. But I'm gonna play a little bit of Joe Biden signing the law for Juneteenth. But also I want when we come back from that, I want us to talk about moving forward. Because it seems like, you know, you got the Trump people, the neo-fascists. They want to put everybody in concentration camps. They want to put everybody in cages. Well, not everybody, but us. They want to put us in those things. And then a lot of us vote for Biden to keep the barbarians out the gates. But then, Biden has been part of the problem too. So, I want us to talk a little bit about solutions. We're not going to have all the answers tonight, but at least leave the audience thinking about solutions. So I'm going to play this short video and then we'll be right back.
This is a day of profound, in my view, profound weight and profound power. A day in which we remember the moral stain, the terrible toll that slavery took on the country and continues to take. What I've long called America's original sin. At the same time, I also remember the extraordinary capacity to heal and to hope and to emerge from the most painful moments. And we're blessed to mark the day in the presence of Miss Opal Lee. As my mother said, God love her. Grandmother of the movement to make Juneteenth a federal holiday. And Ms. Opal is, you won't believe it, she's 49 years old. Or 94 years old. But as I was walking down, I regret that my grandchildren aren't here. Because this is a really, really, really important moment in our history. By making Juneteenth a federal holiday, all Americans can feel the power of this day and learn from our history and celebrate progress and grapple with the distance we've come, but the distance we have to travel, Jim. And I have to say to you, I've only been president for several months, but I think this will go down for me as one of the greatest honors I will have had as president, not because I did it, you did it, Democrats and Republicans.
You know, every time I see Joe Biden, you know, I see two things. One is his mental decline, and you know, and sometimes he has good moments. You know, and I saw that in my own mom when she had dementia. She'll have good moments, and then other times she needs a lot of help. And so, you know, even at the end, they had to push his hand in the direction of Miss Opal to give her the pen. But also the ability of the government, right, on behalf of rich people, to take a segregationist, take a, you know, somebody who attacked Anita Hill, take somebody who supported mass incarceration, take somebody who supported the war in Iraq, and really change his persona so that Joe Biden's number one job is to preserve the system. Because of the damage that Trump did to this country and to capitalism, now Joe Biden is there in the position where his handlers have to make sure to strengthen capitalism in the US. But, you know, how do we get away from that? How do we, you know, have to always go back to the lesser of two evils? I mean, you know, what's the solution? Because we can't keep doing that, because at the end of the day is only hurting us, right? So what do y'all think?
I think, you know, I was at this event. I'm not going to talk about it much in Wisconsin. It was in Maribel. And if anyone knows anything about Wisconsin, they know the Maribel is like the sticks. It's out in the middle of nowhere. It's farm country in Wisconsin. And, you know, Wisconsin is no longer the state that it used to be. A lot of times you go there and you know, that it's you know, I spent my summers, parts of my summers every year in Mississippi. You know, it's the first place I heard my father called a boy. And so, but like there's places you go, even today, you go to Mississippi and say, I need to get as far away from where I am right now as possible. Wisconsin has that vibe. But you know it was about 160 people at this event, and it was indigenous, Black, Latino, and white people, white farmers. Now, you know, if we're to look at the stratum, you know, if we're to break it down into the social stratum where they actually come from, I would say that the percentage of white people who were there were less likely to be what we would identify as working class than the people of color. They were generally farmers, and so you can put them within an upper level of that or middle. It just sort of depends. I don't know the economics of their everyday survival, but you know, I think that like there are people who have been awakened, and we have to begin to have to talk to them. I think it's important to build at the grassroots level, and I think whatever we're doing in the political movement, it has to be a sort of way of circling the entire country. You know, we have to begin to think about building up speak bitterness campaigns where we're engaging and talking to people and not leaving them out. I think one of the things is like we can't expect people political perfection. We have to allow them contradictions and find a way to help ease them out of those contradictions. Some contradictions are sharper than others, but there's a way to talk to people. And I think that part of the left, a lot of times I don't get the sense that they necessarily want to win, but they want to be the most right in the room. I don't want to be the most right in the room. I want to win. And sometimes that takes, you know, patience and being able to build that dialogic with people where you're building that, you know, where your interest is how can I build this union of people who see something wrong? And then when we're able to do that, we have to not leave out the international. Because the conditions that are being created, the reason why a certain sector of the ruling class wants to begin to orient itself more towards Black and indigenous people of color is because they see that in order for, you know, capitalism needs to expand or die. In order for it to do that, for the imperialist system to continue to be what it is, they have to open themselves up to that. And what created those conditions is the international situation. Independent political and economic spheres that have opened up that have decreased economic and political military might of the United States, China and Russia predominantly. So when we look at what they're talking about, and they're talking about Russia doing this or China doing this, we have to have an understanding of why the U.S. is doing that and what's fact and what's fiction. And we have to begin to support the struggles around the world and let that be part of the conversations that we're having with people. But I think ultimately, I think we need to think short term, midterm, and long term, and we need to begin by having a long march around the country and building this dialogic model where we are having these assemblies and conversing with people. And that's part of the process of building independent political power. I think that's
well. Let me tell you, Darlene is on fire. I don't
Yes,
know how
she is.
I don't know
Yes,
how
she
she
is.
heard about this show, but she's like, this focus on purity is a major obstacle in our progress. So
Read the one above that, Mark.
okay. Says, let me see. Okay, we have
We have
enough
enough.
independent and progressive in this country to upset U.S. politics as it exists. Issues that we are fragmented. We all need to get behind one or two candidates that are going to bring the change we want to see. Now, I would agree with that, but I would agree with that on a local level, because one of the times where I've been the most successful in my organizing was when I was a CUNY student. And we had this principle that each campus would organize themselves, right? And then from the work that each campus did, we would have a CUNY student coordinating committee. And then we would coordinate joint actions amongst everybody. And we weren't all on the same page on everything, but we had a set of principles. There's like 5 things that we all agreed on. And then we used the power of what people were doing already. Like, for example, if I look at District Congressional 13 in Harlem, right? If I look at this district, we know people in Washington Heights who are organizing the community. We know people down by 104th Street who are organizing the community. We know people in East Harlem who are organizing the community, right? But everybody's kind of like in their little autonomous little cubicles, right? So what happens if you create a network for those people, a coordinating committee for those people? Then what you start to do is you start to magnify and you start to coordinate their efforts, and you wind up building support between different parts of our community. So, because one of the things that politically growing up, I learned about the Marxist-Leninist Party, right? And you need to have democratic centralism, and you need to have this group that's professional revolutionaries. And, and that worked in the Russian Revolution. They took over state power. But I think that, and so when people think of like a political party, they think of it in terms of Marxist-Leninist terms, right? And I think that there are things that presage that kind of development. Like, for example, even Lenin in the Russian Revolution was part of something called the Russian Social Democratic Party, right? And it had different factions, had different groupings. It was kind of like this network of people who wanted to change society. And so they didn't start out as the Bolshevik Party, right? They started out as part of this broader thing, and then they decided to split off because they wanted to focus their work. And so I think that in kind of like in the situation we're in, we can't be with all this purity and dogmatism. We need to have our ideology. We need to be grounded in it. We need to do our political education, but we also have to be very practical, And I think that, Brother Larry, what you're saying is that recognizing, and also Darlene is saying, recognizing there are people doing work already. So each of us has to, get roots in our communities or our workplaces or our schools, and then be part of something broader. Because if we just stay where we are, we're not going to build a we're not going to build a kind of broad-based movement, Larry, that you're talking about.
I just like to add, when you show that film of Biden, you look at the configurations of the people there. It always bothers me when the central person doesn't look like me when they're signing or speaking something that's supposed to benefit me. And it's always that he's surrounded by cross section of different complexion African Americans. He might have had one other white person in that picture besides him, and that always roused me. I have to say that from the beginning. But I also want to say that if he wants to impress me, I have to say this before I get into what Joe was talking about per se. Sign the check. Sign a $50 billion check as a down payment to create reparation. And I think we need to put pressure on for the reparation movement, because with that, it's not so much to give money to, X amount of people. It could be a cross section of education institution, legit educational institution, health, legit health institution, and even monetary repayment. But I also said that when you think of the movement and what we can do to help, you can think of, to me, the golden age of the movement was in the 60s, because we took so many lessons from our forebearers in terms of whether it's the ones that's known or lesser known. At the beginning of slavery, the Nat Turner, the Sojourner Truth, the Christmas Addicts, on and on until the movement with the Fannie Lou Hamer and Ella Baker, and even whether it was even with Muhammad Ali, the stance that he took to our effort every day, and to a program that we had that came out of 60, like it is. And I said this story before. One thing that that Sammy Davis Jr. said, and was that you got leaders on every block. The thing is, we got to find them, and we got to organize. So it's tiring, it's yeoman work, but what you do is many hands make light work, and that's the thing. We gotta stack victories. I always say that we have to have the staying power, because we have to go back to rolling up our sleeves and getting dirt under our nails. Go to the grassroots things, because that's what propelled us, and that's a proven prodigy. And anything that you look at, whether it is labor movement that was created by white people, they took the template for us, so we know that it works, because there's two type of people. There's originators and there's imitators. So we have to really go back to the what always worked, and that was just organizing and things. Whatever way you decide to do it, whether you got social media, which is different from when we was growing up, because when you look at some of the movements, you look at the movement when in the 1968 Olympics, that was surrounded by the civil rights movement. When you look at the movement with Colin Kaepernick, that movement was surrounded with, if I dare say, the Black Lives Movement. When you look at the movement that may not have got as much play, I can't think of his name, the brother that played ball with Denver that went to LSU, Chris, and he turned to Islam. His movement, right? He didn't get that. It wasn't sustainable. And let me correct. It's always sustainable. That's almost like saying it's weight. But it didn't get the push and the foreplay that they did, because it wasn't surrounded by a movement. So when we look at when we get the push versus when we don't, and it takes a longer struggle, it's always surrounded and synonymous and part and parcel to a movement. We have to look at that. We don't have to reinvent it, because it's out there. We created that template, and we just have to keep forging ahead with that template.
So we got about a couple of minutes left, but again, Darlene posted, we have to decolonize the mind and educate that socialism is not the enemy.
I agree with that.
That's from
your mind, the rest shall follow.
Yeah. So as we wrap up, Larry, are there some words you want to close out with, and then Bill will let you end the show tonight, as you usually do. But Larry, are there any last comments that you want to bring up at this point?
And what it is that there are all these people who, we get sort of snarky when everything happens, and impatient. And so I think that everything is an opportunity, and I think we have to look at it that way. And you don't want to seem as if you are laughing at people for being happy for something. There's a lot of people who are, why are you celebrating Juneteenth or doing this? I'm like, you should celebrate. You might have your disagreements, but you should recognize what people are feeling and their right to be happy for being seen. And that will give you an opportunity to have a deeper conversation with them than them feeling like you're mocking them. So I think we need to learn how to be with the people.
All right. Thank you, brother. So, all right, Bill, we got about 20 seconds left. Take it away.
All right. I'll take that 20 seconds. I agree with you. I thank you for coming on, Larry. It's always a pleasure being in your company, through Zoom or physically. I think what we have to walk away from this is think about our household. You have to rule your household. You can't be your kid's best friend. You have to teach him your history. You can't wait and expect somebody else to teach it, because we know that nobody's going to teach it. They're not going to teach it correctly. So I think that we need to go back to the essence, and that's the Black family. And also I defend the Black family because we have our issues. But there's nothing wrong with defending it, because the issue wasn't created by us, but yet and still we do have an issue. And we have to have a balance on that. I like what Darlene was saying. Shout out to you, Darlene. I hope that you're going to be a regular participant. But I think that we just have to go back, really simply put, to our house. We have to be the kings that we are and the queens that we are, because we come from royalty. And we need to keep reinforcing that so we can be proud of who we are. And we don't have to make excuses or take a defensive posture. You know, and when you don't take a defensive posture and you assert yourself, people tend to say, you know what, you're right. So let's try that. And so I will close with people, power, all power to the people.
All power to the people.